last night at the White House, where there was a dramatic meeting, first between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine, followed by a meeting, an extraordinary one, of leaders of 7 European countries, including France, Britain, Germany, Italy, and the leaders of EU and NATO as well. And they decided that there will be, in the future, as early as the next couple of weeks, a direct bilateral between President Putin and President Zelensky, followed by a trilateral with President Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, which will eventually all pave the way for what everyone is hoping, a peace agreement and an end to the war. India is also paying very, very close attention to what's happening in this whole situation that's emerging between the United States and Russia. You had the Alaska summit between President Putin and President Trump on Friday. And then yesterday, you had this series of meetings, first between President Trump and President Zelensky, and then a series of European leaders from Britain, France, Germany, Italy, all of whom had made a dash to the White House. President Trump, of course, met with President Zelensky at the White House on Monday. It's a key moment after almost 6 months after the first rather tense encounter that they had at the Oval Office back in February. Yesterday, none of that sort of stuff happened. Trump has said that he's trying to arrange first a bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelensky. He's hoping that'll happen by the end of August, in a couple of weeks. And then after that, there will be a trilateral between President Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. Zelensky's also confirmed that sensitive issues, whether it's the issue of security guarantees, the return of abducted Ukrainian children, even the question of territory and which territory and how much territory Ukraine has to give up, that'll be handled later on, either in the bilateral format or in the trilateral format. He's also called the talks yesterday at the White House constructive, saying that there were strong signals from the United States, including an assurance by the US president himself that there will be some form of US involvement in these security guarantees. That'll be front-loaded by the Europeans, of course, but the US will also be involved in a substantial way. US President Donald Trump met with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and other European leaders at the White House Monday. It was a cordial but inconclusive meeting on how to end the war in Ukraine. Much of the meeting focused on what security guarantees the European countries and the United States would provide to Ukraine if Zelensky agreed to a deal to end the war. Trump also spoke with President Vladimir Putin of Russia to begin setting up a possible direct meeting between Zelensky and Putin. Though it was not clear at the end of the meetings on Monday when or even whether such a session would come about between Putin and Zelensky. 3 days after Trump gave Putin literally a red carpet welcome at their meeting in Alaska, he presided over a discussion with America's traditional allies from Europe, which included the leaders of 7 major European countries, including Britain, France, and Germany, as well as NATO and EU. All of them rushed to Washington to ensure that Ukraine is not strong-armed into a deal that it doesn't want to accept.
We're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
Some differences broke out, though. Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany argued for a ceasefire to be put in place before any further negotiations with Russia. But he was gently rebuffed by Trump. And President Emmanuel Macron of France suggested that he was skeptical that Putin was interested in dealing in good faith at all. He said that he did not think that Putin wanted peace. But the good news is that there were no blow-ups, the kind of which that we saw in a previous visit by Zelensky to the White House back in February. All the participants in this week's meetings appear to agree to a plan to arrange direct talks between Russia and Ukraine while other issues are being worked out. But the precise nature of the security guarantees for Ukraine and whether or not Ukraine will have to give up territory, how much territory it will have to give up, all of that was not publicly discussed. European leaders pressed Trump to provide what they call a security guarantee that's similar to NATO's Article 5. As per NATO's Article 5, an attack on Ukraine would be considered an attack on all NATO countries. But Trump was non-committal on that. Instead, he simply said that America will also be involved in some form of security backstop for Ukraine.
There'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Trump continued to portray Putin as genuinely interested in finding a way to end the war. At one point of time, Trump broke off the session with European leaders in the East Room of the White House, and then he telephoned the Russian leader. That telephone call lasted for about 40 minutes before Trump returned to the European leaders and Zelensky and briefed them about his conversation with the Russian president. Trump later said in a social media post that he had called Putin to begin arranging a meeting between Zelensky and the Russian president first. That, he said, would then be followed by another meeting which will be a trilateral between the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. But it is not clear when and if such a meeting will happen at all. Putin does not consider Zelensky as an equal. He does not even consider Zelensky to have been elected legitimately. So even if it does happen, this meeting, the bilateral and then subsequently the trilateral, it seems unlikely that this meeting will happen at the level of the presidents. It is more likely to happen at the level of senior advisors or possibly even foreign ministers. Trump has said that he does not want to provide more aid, particularly military aid to Ukraine, but that he's willing to sell arms to the Ukrainians to fend off Russia. Zelensky expressed particular interest in acquiring more Patriot air defense systems to help minimize the damage from Russian missile attacks. In fact, the Financial Times was reporting that Zelensky had proposed to buy up to $100 billion of American weapons, which will then be paid for by Europe. Also, America will buy from Ukraine up to $50 billion worth of drones made by Ukraine. When asked what kind of security guarantees he wants, Zelensky said everything.
What security guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. And really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and then people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
Much of the discussion centered on how to put in place effective security guarantees for Ukraine to end the war. On the other hand, Trump pushed for a trilateral meeting with Zelensky, Putin, and himself, but there were very few tangible signs of progress that was made in the meetings or any specific details that were shared at the end of it. There was no mention whatsoever of any concessions of territory which Ukraine will have to give up to end the war. But it was clear in the run-up to the meeting that Ukraine will have to give up nearly almost all of the Donbas region in the east. It will also have to forget about Crimea, which Russia had annexed in 2014. There was no mention either of ceasefire, which Trump had insisted on before the meeting with Putin in Alaska. He seems to have now shifted that position closer to Russia's position, which is in favor of a larger peace agreement and not a ceasefire. But there were frequent discussions on security guarantees to make sure that Russia does not invade again. America and Europe would possibly assemble a military force that's drawn from an international coalition of the willing. That force would be stationed in Ukraine after a peace agreement between Kiev and Moscow, but no one has quite detailed publicly what that force would look like. One concept is a full-blown peacekeeping force that would supplement the Ukrainian military. It would be put in place just for defensive purposes, but the idea would be to deter Russia from attacking again, particularly if there are foreign soldiers from NATO countries who are stationed in Ukraine. The problem is that for that force, that military force, to be some kind of a credible deterrent to stop Putin from attacking again, it would take tens of thousands of troops. But that is something no one is willing to commit to. No one wants to put boots on the ground, even as America and Europe have been badly burned in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I want to go across to Elena Treen. She's a White House reporter with CNN. Thanks very much, Elena, for speaking with us. How is the White House viewing these latest developments? Pretty important meetings that happened yesterday at the White House. Both Zelensky and Putin seem to be, at least for the moment, willing or open to the idea of a bilateral meeting, followed by a trilateral meeting with President Trump. can he secure the peace deal? I mean, ultimately, that's what he wants too. He sort of dumped the idea of a ceasefire. He says there's got to be a full peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, well, and I'd also would just say it's unclear at this moment if that bilateral meeting that the president is pushing for is actually going to happen. Zelensky is showing willingness to have that, but we aren't hearing the same from Putin and the Kremlin. They're actually throwing cold water on that idea. And so there are concerns that perhaps Putin is not going to be willing to sit down one-on-one with Zelensky. And part of that is because Putin doesn't really view Zelensky as an equal to him. We're hearing similar things out of the Kremlin this morning, but still, of course, waiting to see if this is even possible. Now, from the White House point of view, they believe that this is necessary to ending the war. The president, President Trump specifically, believes that Zelensky and Putin need to be in the same room. They need to hash this out, whether it's with him or without him, in order to really find an end to this war. And that's kind of what you saw happening yesterday. One of the key things from that summit with Zelensky here, but also 7 other European leaders. You mentioned, France, Germany, Finland, the European Union president, the head of NATO, all of them here to try and hash out what needs to be done to really see if they can get to that peace agreement. And the president then paused his meeting partway through. He had a couple hours where he was talking with these leaders, and he went into the Oval Office and called up the Russian leader to talk it through with him. I'm told by a White House official that after that, he invited the European leaders and Zelensky back into the Oval Office to brief them on what was discussed. And then, of course, we saw the president himself post on social media that he is trying to set up this bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelensky. And then if that goes well, there could be another trilateral meeting that would include him to follow. But again, very much unclear at this point in time, when that could happen, where it could happen, but also if it even will happen. And that's what I think the conversations today and over the course of this next week is going to be really focused on. But as for whether or not he'll be able to achieve a peace deal, it is very clear that the president is willing to go places where many leaders aren't to try and get this done. And that is by, of course, seeing Putin come to the United States. He was on American soil meeting with President Donald Trump, but then also, potentially, and this is where I think some European allies and Ukrainians have a little bit of concern, is potentially willing to give up more than perhaps they are comfortable with. So all of that really a focus of discussion yesterday and a key question as we look ahead to whether or not this meeting between Putin and Zelensky will actually take place.
A lot of the conversation yesterday also focused on security guarantees for Ukraine that Russia would think twice or maybe 10 times before trying to attack Ukraine again. And Trump said that while it'll be front-loaded by the European countries, it will have U.S. involvement. Do we know what the nature of these guarantees are going to be? Does it involve a peacekeeping force? Will they be, U.S. troops guarding the border between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, what are the contours of this?
That is still unclear, but definitely something that was really a central focus of yesterday, I'm told, of the conversations that Trump had with these European leaders. Look, the fact that the president himself, President Trump, is saying that he wants the United States to be involved in ensuring the security of Ukraine should a peace deal be reached is a notable change from the rhetoric of the past. He had often said that it would be up to European leaders to really have those security guarantees for Ukraine. Now he's saying he wants to be a part of that the United States will be a part of that. As for whether or not U.S. troops will actually be on the ground, the president was asked that directly yesterday by reporters, and he did not rule it out. He didn't say that there would be, a military presence from the United States to help secure Ukraine, but he didn't say there wouldn't be either. And so I think that, of course, is also a key question. We heard Zelensky today actually put out a statement saying him and other leaders are really working on what the concrete steps would be and what these security guarantees would look like in the specifics, really trying trying to hash out the specifics and the details of what that could look like. But a lot of the European leaders, after they left the meeting, sounded very optimistic about where President Donald Trump was on security guarantees, calling it a breakthrough. We heard that term used by the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, as well as the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, all saying there was a breakthrough when it comes to security. And I'd remind you as well, it comes after we had heard Steve Witkoff, one of the president's special envoys. He was in the room on Friday when Trump met with Putin, saying that there will be some similar, akin to Article 5 security guarantees, and that Russia said that they are willing to accept that. So that was another major breakthrough in this entire process of trying to find peace. But again, the contours of that and the details of what the United States is actually willing to provide still very much unclear at this point.
All right, fascinating indeed. Elena Treen, thank you very much for joining us this morning from the White House. Thank you.